I retired after selling my hardware chain for $2 million, and the morning the wire cleared, my son showed up at my door with a bottle of champagne he hadn't paid for, and a smile I'd seen on a coyote once, right before it went for the chicken. I should have recognized it then. I didn't. My name is Walter Gideon Pruitt. I'm 64 years old, and I spent 41 years building Pruitt's True Value, 12 stores across central Ohio, from a single storefront in Zanesville that my father left me with a broken cash register and a note that said, "Don't sell it." I sold it anyway, to a regional chain that wanted the real estate more than the inventory, and I walked away with enough money to live the rest of my life without worrying about a leaking roof or a bad month. My late wife, Rosemary, would have said that was enough. She always said enough was enough. She passed 14 months before the sale closed. Pancreatic cancer, fast and merciless in the way only certain things are. I spent the last 3 months of the negotiation sitting in a hospital room holding her hand with one hand and signing documents on my knee with the other, and I will tell you honestly that I am not entirely sure I read everything I signed. She knew. She told me 3 days before the end, "Don't let them take you for a fool after I'm gone, Walt." Her voice was barely above a whisper by then. "I won't," I told her. I was wrong. The champagne my son brought that morning was warm. He'd grabbed it from a gas station on his way over, which told me everything about how he felt about the occasion, versus how he felt about the money. My son, I'll call him by his relation because that's how I think of him now, as a role he failed at rather than a person with a name I gave him, is 40 years old and has the handshake of a man who has never finished anything he started. He married a woman 7 years ago who I'll call my daughter-in-law, and she is sharp in the way a knife left in a drawer too long is sharp. Dangerous mostly to the person who reaches in without looking. I loved them both. I want to be clear about that. I spent years making excuses for the two of them together, for the business ventures that never quite launched, for the borrowed money that was never quite repaid, for the holiday visits that happened only when they needed something and stopped when they had it. Rosemary didn't make excuses. She watched. She said to me once, sitting at the kitchen table with her coffee going cold, "He's not a bad person, Walt. He's just weak. And weak people around money become something worse." I thought she was being hard on him. She was being accurate. After she died, they came around more. I told myself it was grief, that they were checking on me, that a family pulls together in loss. And maybe in the first weeks that was true. But slowly, so slowly I didn't feel it happening, the visits started to have an agenda. Could I co-sign a loan for a new truck? Could I look at a business proposal my son had put together? Could I maybe just transfer a little to help them get through the month? I said yes more than I should have. I was 63 and alone in a house that still smelled like Rosemary's lotion, and I was desperate for the sound of people who belonged to me. Then the Pruitt's True Value sale closed on a Thursday afternoon in March. $2 million, wired to my account, confirmed at 4:17 p.m. That evening my son called. By Saturday morning he was at my door with warm gas station champagne and that coyote smile. "Dad," he said, stepping inside without being invited, which he had started doing recently, "we should talk about what comes next." My daughter-in-law was with him. She was wearing a new coat I hadn't seen before, camel-colored, the kind you don't buy at a department store. She kissed my cheek and said, "We're so proud of you," which was the first time she had ever said anything remotely like that to me, and I felt the wrongness of it the way you feel a nail in your shoe, not immediately, but with each step. They had a plan. They had, in fact, a very detailed plan that they presented to me at my own kitchen table with printed pages, which my son must have prepared some time before the sale closed, which meant he had been thinking about my money longer than I had. The plan involved a family real estate investment group. They had already spoken to an attorney, a man named Fogarty, who they described as a specialist in estate preservation. The structure would protect the money from taxes and ensure continuity of the family legacy. I am a hardware man. I know what a Phillips head is and what a flathead is, and why you don't use one where the other belongs. I am not a financial attorney. But I built 12 stores, and I read every contract I signed, except for those 3 months in the hospital, and I know when someone is explaining something in a way designed to make you nod rather than understand. I nodded. Then I said, "Let me have Harrelson look it over." Harrelson was my attorney. Had been for 22 years. He was 71 and moved like a man underwater, but had a mind like a steel file cabinet, nothing lost, nothing out of place. My son's face didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. My daughter-in-law picked up her coffee cup. A small movement, a nothing movement. But I had sold hardware for 40 years, and I had read 10,000 customers deciding whether to trust me, and I recognized the tiny recalibration that happens when a person realizes their plan has encountered an obstacle. Of course, my son said. That's the smart thing to do. They left an hour later. I stood at the kitchen window and watched their car. The new truck, I noticed, not quite paid for. Reverse out of my driveway, and I thought about Rosemary. I thought about what she said about weak people and money. I called Harrelson that afternoon. He said he'd look at it Monday. He called me back Tuesday. His voice was careful in the way it gets, when he's about to tell you something you don't want to hear, measured and slow, like he's feeling out the ground before each step. Walt, he said, this Fogarty is not an estate preservation specialist. He's a real estate attorney who had his license flagged in 2019 for a client complaint. The structure they're proposing transfers management authority to your son within 18 months automatically if you become, and this is the language they used, cognitively impaired or otherwise incapacitated. I sat down on the kitchen chair, the same chair I always sit in. The vinyl on the armrest has a crack in it that I've been meaning to fix for 3 years. Cognitively impaired, I said. That's their language, not mine. Walt, I've been doing this a long time. This document is written to transfer your assets away from you on a medical determination. It wouldn't hold up to serious challenge, but it doesn't need to. By the time it was challenged, you'd have been cleaned out. I want to tell you I felt rage. I want to tell you I threw something or said something loud. I didn't. What I felt was the particular cold that comes from being right about something you were hoping you were wrong about. The coyote smile, the new coat. We're so proud of you. I thanked Harrelson. I told him to keep the documents. I did not call my son. I had been a CEO, even if the company was small enough that I was also the guy who fixed the bathroom tiles at the Zanesville store. I knew how to stay quiet when staying quiet is the right move. I waited. I watched. They called the following Sunday to ask if I'd thought about the proposal. I said I was still looking it over. My son said, Dad, Fogarty says the structure needs to be in place before the end of the quarter for the tax benefits. Urgency. The salesman's pressure tool. I had used it myself in the early years, not proud of it. I'll let you know, I said. The following week my daughter-in-law started calling more often. Brief calls, warm and solicitous, asking how I was sleeping, whether I'd eaten, whether I'd been out. I had not been out much. That was true. The house was large and quiet, and I was 64, and the man I bought the house for, to give her a good kitchen, to give her a yard, was gone now, and the house just sat around me like a coat a size too large. Dad, we've been worried about you, she said on one of those calls. Her voice was rich with manufactured concern. You've seemed a little scattered lately, forgetful. It happens, but we want to make sure someone's keeping an eye on things. I had not seemed scattered. I had not been forgetful. I balanced my own checkbook to the penny and had done it for 40 years. But I understood the play. I had just been handed the entire script. They were building something. They were collecting statements, creating a record, scattered, forgetful, a man alone in a big house, who maybe couldn't manage $2 million on his own. They were laying a foundation. I called Harrelson again that evening and told him what she'd said. He was quiet for a long moment. Walt, he said, I think you should keep notes. Dates, what was said, who was present. Don't tell them anything about your plans. And do you have a doctor, a primary care physician, someone who knows you? I did. Dr. Sylvester, who had been seeing me for 15 years, and who had told me at my last physical in October that for a man my age I was in excellent shape, and should try to eat more vegetables, which I had not done. I made an appointment with Dr. Sylvester for the following week, not because I was sick, because I wanted it on record that I was not. The call that changed everything came on a Wednesday. It was my son. He said he'd made reservations at a restaurant called Dorado, which was new and expensive in a way that suggested the reservation was more about the appearance of treating me than about me. He said he wanted to celebrate properly, just the three of us, and that Fogarty would join for dessert to walk through the final document. That was the word that caught me. Final. Not draft. Final. As if my agreement was already a settled matter. I said I'd be there. I spent 2 days thinking. I called Harrelson and told him about the dinner. He said he'd be available by phone. I thought about what Rosemary had said. I thought about what I would do if a supplier had presented me with a contract I hadn't agreed to and called it final. I'd show up. I'd hear what they said. And I wouldn't sign a thing. Dorado was on the 4th floor of a building downtown that used to be a bank, and they'd kept the vault door, which I thought was either clever or ironic or both. The lighting was low and warm, and the menus had no prices on them, which is how expensive restaurants let you know you should not ask. My son stood when I came in and gripped my hand with both of his, which men do when they want to seem sincere. My daughter-in-law was already seated and she had dressed for the occasion, and it looked good on her. And I remembered suddenly the woman she had been when my son first brought her home, quick-lawing, a little nervous. Someone who maybe had the chance to be better than what she'd become. The dinner was careful. They were warm and attentive. My son refilled my water before I asked. My daughter-in-law asked me about the Zanesville store, which store I missed, whether I had talked to any of my old managers. She was drawing me out. She wanted me comfortable, nostalgic, emotionally softened. I ate my steak and answered carefully, and felt nothing but a patient, clear-eyed watchfulness. Then my son excused himself to take a phone call, which left me alone with my daughter-in-law. She leaned in a little, conspiratorial, warm. "I'm glad we're doing this," she said. "I know the last year has been hard. I know you've been struggling." "I've been sad," I said. "That's not the same as struggling." Something moved across her face. She recovered quickly. "Of course, that's what I meant. But you have to think about what Rosemary would have wanted. She'd want you protected, using Rosemary's name. I noticed that." "She would," I said. My son came back, and Fogarty arrived at the table 7 minutes later. He was a thin man with a soft handshake and rimless glasses, and the particular confidence of a man who has never had his advice rejected. He ordered an espresso, and opened a document sleeve, and began to lay papers on the table, in the practiced way of a person who has done this many times. The document was exactly what Harrelson had described, elegantly written, very difficult to understand if you weren't looking for the specific clause on page 9, subsection 2C, which described the conditions for what they called a management transition. The conditions were a signed physician's statement attesting to cognitive decline. "Who's the physician?" I asked. Fogarty blinked. "I beg your pardon. Whose physician? Who determines the cognitive decline? Is it my doctor or someone you've designated?" A small pause. My son said, "Dad, it's just a standard protective clause. It's there for your benefit." "Whose benefit and who's the doctor?" I said again, pleasantly. Fogarty said they had a relationship with a specialist, a Dr. Murch, who could conduct assessments. "A specialist you recommended," I said. "Not a doctor who has known me for 15 years. The table had gone very quiet. My daughter-in-law was looking at her water glass. My son's jaw had tightened by a degree that someone who didn't know him wouldn't catch. "Dad," he said, and his voice had shifted now. The warmth had a seam in it. "You're reading something into this that isn't there. We're trying to help you." "I know you are," I said. I set my napkin on the table. I looked at Fogarty, and then at my son, and then at my daughter-in-law, and I said, "I'm not signing this tonight. I'm not signing it this week. If you'd like Harrelson to meet with Fogarty and work out something that doesn't include a doctor I've never met, determining whether I'm fit to manage my own money, I'm open to that conversation." My son started to speak. I held up one hand, not aggressively, just clearly, the way you hold up a hand in traffic. "I love you," I said. "Both of you. But I built Pruitt's True Value from a broken cash register and a note that said don't sell it, and I know how to read a contract. Dinner was lovely. Tell Fogarty thank you for his time." I put cash on the table for my portion of the meal, which I had calculated in my head during the appetizer, because I had no interest in owing them anything, not even a dinner check. I drove home. I sat in the driveway for a few minutes in the dark with the engine ticking. I was 64 years old, and I had just told my only son that I was not his to take. It should have felt like victory. It felt like putting a dog down. The right thing and the terrible thing at the same time. I called Harrelson from the driveway. He picked up on the second ring, which told me he'd been waiting. "Dinner's done," I said. "They had a Dr. Murch lined up to assess me." Harrelson said something I don't think I'd ever heard him say in 22 years. "Those," he said, "are not smart people dealing with a stupid man, and that's going to hurt them." Within the week, he had begun putting together what he called a record of sound mind, the cleanest, most documented picture of a cognitively intact man you could assemble. Dr. Sylvester's physical, my financial records for the last decade, references from 6 former business associates who had worked with me in the last 2 years, a statement from the acquiring company's lead attorney attesting that I had been sharp and engaged throughout 4 months of complex negotiation. And then Harrelson did something I hadn't asked him to do. He hired an investigator, not because I asked, because, as he told me later, he had a feeling about the Fogarty connection. He said, "In my experience, Walt, documents written to transfer control away from someone on a medical determination don't get written unless the medical determination is already arranged." He was right. The investigator's name was Delacroix, a woman in her 50s who found things with the same quiet inevitability as water finding a low spot. Within 2 weeks, she had pulled the public record on Dr. Murch. He had 2 malpractice suits dismissed on procedural grounds in the last 6 years. He had a business registration for a consulting entity called Murch Assessment Partners, LLC, which had been paid $4,500 by an LLC connected to my son's business accounts. 4 months before the dinner at Dorado. 4 months. Before the sale even closed. Before the champagne from the gas station. Before the new coat. They had hired a doctor to evaluate me, before they even knew I would need evaluating. Harrelson sat across from me in his office with the investigator's report between us and said, "This is conspiracy to commit fraud, Walt. They intended to use a paid medical opinion to have you declared incompetent and transfer your assets to your son's control. This isn't a family misunderstanding." I looked at the report. I looked at the date on the payment. I thought about Rosemary in that armchair, the unread book. He doesn't build things, he just takes. She had known. She had said it in her gentle way, and I had called her cynical, and we had argued about it, and she had let it go because she loved me, and she knew I had to find out for myself. "I am sorry it took me this long, Rosie." I told Harrelson to proceed. He called their attorney, not Fogarty, but the attorney of record for my son's LLC, and informed him that we had documented evidence of a prearranged medical evaluation paid for with funds that could be traced as and that we were prepared to bring it to the State Bar if a complete and documented withdrawal of the proposal was not filed within 10 business days, along with a signed statement that no further action of this type would be pursued. My son called me that evening. The warmth was entirely gone. He was 20 degrees colder than I'd ever heard him, which was strange in its own way, because it made him sound more like himself than he had in months. "You sixed a lawyer on me," he said. "I hired my lawyer to protect my interests," I said. "The same way you hired a doctor to undermine them." Silence. "I want you to know," I said, "that I am not angry. I was, for about 2 days. But what I am now is clear. I'm clear about who you are, and I'm clear about what I'm going to do with the rest of my life." "And what is that?" he said, flatly. "Live it," I said. The withdrawal was filed. Fogarty's involvement ended there. I had a feeling the State Bar inquiry that Harrelson quietly opened on him would take care of the rest. Dr. Murch lost the Murch Assessment Partners LLC in a licensing review that Delacroix's report helped initiate. My son did not go to prison. I want to be honest about that. The evidence was enough to frighten him, and not enough, without my willingness to pursue it fully through criminal channels, to convict him. I chose not to do that. I have thought about that choice many times, and I don't entirely know if it was right. What I know is that I set up a trust, an actual one that Harrelson built from scratch with a bank trustee and an independent financial advisor, structured so that no family member can access principal, and so that any medical determination affecting my competency requires 2 independent neurologists I have personally approved. I put $30,000 a year into a charitable account that I distribute to causes Rosemary cared about. The rest sits in instruments that will outlast me and go to organizations that help people who don't have a Harrelson to call. I did not cut my son off entirely. I want to be honest about that too, because I think people in these situations sometimes expect a clean break, and the truth is rarely clean. He is still my son. He is still weak, and weakness is not a crime, and I still love him in the diminished, careful way you love something that has shown you its teeth. We speak occasionally. I do not lend him money. I do not co-sign anything. When he asks, and he has asked twice since the Dorado dinner, I say the same thing. The trust handles it. Talk to the trustee. My daughter-in-law stopped calling after the withdrawal was filed. That somehow was the clearest statement of all. 7 months after everything settled, I hired a part-time assistant for my personal finances, a young man named Declan Orvis who'd just gotten his CFP and was too earnest and too careful to have learned how to lie yet. He comes on Tuesdays with his laptop and his questions, and he calls me Mr. Pruitt, even though I've asked him 4 times not to. He reminds me a little of myself at that age, before I knew enough to be guarded about things. Last Tuesday he came in and found me in the kitchen looking at photographs. Rosemary and me at the Zanesville store, the first year. She's laughing at something off camera. She always had better things to look at than the camera. Declan set up his laptop and pretended not to notice. Mr. Pruitt, he said after a few minutes. The fourth quarter summary is looking solid. Good, I said. There's also a letter from the Children's Hospital Foundation. They want to name the equipment fund after your wife. I looked at the photograph a moment longer. Tell them yes, I said. He typed something. Then, because he is 27 and doesn't always know when to stay quiet, he said, she must have been something. I set the photograph down. I looked out the window at the yard, at the oak tree she picked out herself, at the garden bed where the crocuses were just starting to come up despite the cold, which is what crocuses do, they come up anyway. She was the one who saw clearly, I said. I just needed longer to catch up.